Hi, guys. Jim Vinosky with Manufacturing Talks. Welcome back. I love to brag, so I'm going to. We've got another great show for you today. I've got Harry Moser. He's the president and founder of the Reshoring Initiative, and he's going to talk to us about the head of steam that reshoring our manufacturing back to America has got going and where we go from here. So we have Harry coming on in just a minute. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome back to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vinosky, your host, and I'm really happy to be joined today by Harry Moser. He is the founder and president of the Reshoring Initiative. Welcome, Harry.
Jim, it's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. You and I have a lot of agreement in the need to bring production back to the United States.
And I was honored to be mentioned in one of your articles recently. So
and we'll talk about that.
We're getting it going here.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and all for a good cause. Before we dive into the Reshoring Initiative, why don't you just tell the audience a little about yourself, what you did in your background, how you got to do and what you're doing today.
Okay. So professionally, I got 2 engineering degrees from MIT, eventually an MBA from the University of Chicago, worked in manufacturing, started at GE in their manufacturing management program, worked my way up through various companies, eventually was president of 2 different companies. Most notably, for 25 years, I was the president of what was then called Charmy, which is a maker of EDM and high-speed milling machines. So Charmy, now it's GF Machining Solutions. So I was president for North America, about $100 million or so a year company. It's a nice company, made machines, sold them all over North America. And it was a wonderful job. You couldn't ask for better than this. When I joined the company, we were number 7 in the industry in North America. And 6 years later, we were number 1. So it's the kind of thing that, it's like a put on my gravestone. That's one of the things I wanted to put. Thing. Yeah. And of course, it wasn't just Harry. It was the team and machines and everybody else that did it. But it worked. From a personal perspective, I was born in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is right across the river from New York. And my ancestors, the Cranes, I'm Harry Crane Moser. So my ancestors, the Cranes, were settled in Elizabeth in 1670, and the first Europeans got there in 1660. So they were right there at the beginning. And my the ancestral home, the Crane estate, my grandfather was born in, died in. He was the interesting story. He worked for the local gas utility. He started at 17 as a plumber and retired at 86 as the secretary of the corporation on the board of directors, kind of thing. So classic Horatio Alger kind of story, and working for the same company for 66 years or something. I mean, this is a long time. And his biggest customer was Singer Sewing Machine, which had their world biggest factory was in Elizabeth. And
I've written about Singer, by the way.
Okay, good. And
great company.
And that was 3 million square feet, 5,000 employees. So huge, big, even by today's standards, that's a big factory.
Oh, yeah.
And my grandfather was a foreman. My dad ran about a third of the factory. I worked there summers, and I drove past 20 years ago, and there's nothing of Singer there. Mm-hmm. As far as I can tell, nothing of Singer is made anywhere in the United States anymore. It's all been offshored. Okay, and that was significantly the motivation to found the Reshoring Initiative. And similar to that experience, during my career selling the machine tools and selling foundry equipment and things like that, company after company, industry after industry I wanted to sell to, they'd go out of business before I'd sell them anything because the cheap imports came in and wiped them out completely. So they definitely weren't buying any equipment. And so all those things said somebody has to do something. And I retired in 2010 and founded the Reshoring Initiative. Yeah.
Excellent. And you should show off your T-shirt there for the audience.
Okay, here we go.
The swag, are those
Manufacturing
available?
is
Can people order
cool.
those T-shirts?
No, it says manufacturing is cool, and the what you cannot order them if a company has reshored something and we don't already know about their having done so. They contact me, or they can just go to the website and do info@reshorenow.org and tell us about their case of reshoring, and they tell us their shirt size, and we send them a shirt made in the U.S. out of U.S. cotton.
Beautiful. That is the best swag ever right there. Excellent. Well, so tell us more about the Reshoring Initiative. I know there's a lot to go through there. Give us kind of that 10,000-foot view of what you guys are up to.
Yeah. So the mission, we're a nonprofit, first to start with, very, very nonprofit, you might say. And the mission is to balance the goods trade deficit. So the goods trade deficit in 2022, and I think 23 about the same, about $1.2 trillion. That's with a T, 1.2 trillion. So we imported 1.2 trillion more than we exported. And that difference is approximately 6 million manufacturing jobs. So if we just had balance, like on average, every country in effect has to be balanced, and on average, and we would have 6 million more manufacturing jobs, which would be about a 40 or 50% more than we actually have. So we've got this huge relative decline in manufacturing in comparison to other developed countries, certainly in comparison to China, India, Mexico, and so on, for various reasons, which I'll get into. But our job is to balance that and to bring back those jobs. And the way we do it, you might say 4 means. First, we're the only source of information on the trend. We document the trend. We know what companies have brought back what products from what countries to what states for what reasons, how many jobs. That sort of like the Commerce Department would do, but they don't do it. We do it, and so we document, and we believe that's essential because the best way to get company B to decide to reshore is to see that companies A and C have done it successfully. And if they, it's working for them, maybe we should at least take a look. Right. So we document. We promote it, like being here with you today is promoting it. And we get, had your article, that was great. I was on Fox streaming or Fox Live, something like that. Yep. And a variety, I just had an article in Industry Week. So I do 60, 70 things like this every year. Never as good as with you, Jim, but something like that.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
And we write 3-4 articles of our own a month. So we promote, and then we enable. And for the listener, enable is the most important part. So we have the TCO estimator, total cost of ownership estimator. And the purpose of that is to get companies to stop buying just on the basis of price, but instead to look at all of the relevant costs and risks. So in addition to price, and let's say comparing U.S. to China, the price in China is going to be 30% lower or something like that on average. Huh? But when they add in duty and freight and carrying cost of inventory and intellectual property risk, travel cost, the risk of stocking out, especially now with the geopolitical risk that's present, that wasn't visibly present 10 years ago. When you add all those things in, then all of a sudden it becomes clear that for 20 or 30% of what people are now importing, even from China, which is very competitive, even from China, 20, 30%, you'd be more profitable making it here. You not, I can raise the price by 30%, sell at the same price, but make it here and you'll be okay. So TCO estimator, import substitution program. A company makes something, a widget, or something, a pump, a valve, and we can tell them who the biggest importers of those things are, and then train them to use the TCO estimator to convince the importer to buy from them instead. Okay, so a series of tools and things like that. So we enable, and then we advocate. So we've identified what should change in the system, how the government should be different, the U.S. government, federal. And so we advocate to those groups for that. and they listen. They'll come to us for data, but they rarely come for advice.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and that data is vital. We talked for the article you mentioned. There's a lot of reasons that our kind of sticker price as American makers is seemingly non-competitive. But when you talk about the actual total cost, even in normal times, we truly are competitive. And then you get through stuff like COVID, when people couldn't get product, and what was the cost of all the lost sales. And now, as you just mentioned, there's new geopolitical disruptions that are going to cause more lost sales.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the TCO estimator is vital, folks. I'll have a link to the Reshoring Institute
initiative.
Description. Yeah.
Reshoring
Initiative. Thank you.
That's the brand.
We'll
You got to
have
stay
their
with
website in the description, and definitely go check that out. In fact, I'll include the specific link as well to the TCO estimator page.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, certainly there's work to be done. But for that article, you introduced me to a survey that just came out that had some good news. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I'd call it more good news.
Yeah.
The company's called Medius. They provide software to help companies automate accounts payable and so on. Very nice company, and their survey found they surveyed 500,000 U.S. manufacturing companies, typically medium-sized, and 69% of them have reshored or are reshoring. That doesn't mean reshoring everything, but reshoring at least something,
Right.
And of those who have reshored, I think 94% said they'd been successful. They were satisfied with the results of having done so. So very nice results. So I'm delighted. It was one of the more comprehensive surveys that I've seen. But the interesting thing is that their data point, this 69%, I've got a chart that shows how, starting with Boston Consulting Group doing surveys back around 2011, 2012. And back then, a very credible group. Back then, they were coming up with 8%.
Yeah.
And then I've got a series of other surveys that were done by different people, but asking almost exactly the same question. And it's gone from 8% up to 70%.
Yeah.
Over the time period from 11 to now. So that's very impressive. And and that's consistent. It correlates exactly with our data on the number of jobs reshored. So in 2010, when we were founded, 6,000 jobs were announced coming back that year. Combination of reshoring by U.S. companies and FDI, foreign direct investment by foreign headquartered companies. So 6,000 in 2010, and in 2022, 350,000. So you take that curve and you compare the percentage of companies, the two curves look almost like they overlapped almost completely.
Right.
So it's and they confirm, each one confirms that the other one is real. A couple of other interesting things in terms of trends. Yep. A couple of groups track earnings calls and mentions of various terms in earnings calls. Bank of America does, a couple other people do it, and the frequency of mentioning things like reshoring, onshoring, decoupling, and so on has gone up by a factor of 20 from 2018 to 2022. So a factor of 20, so 2,000% increase. Tying that into Wall Street, we've got 3 large international asset managers, big companies, the kind of people you'd recognize, but I can't name, and they buy our raw data, and they slice it and dice it and feed it out to their clients and their analysts to help those clients and analysts find opportunities to increase their returns by finding the places that are going to benefit the most from reshoring. So we're honored to have Wall Street that 20 years ago was telling companies, get the hell out of manufacturing.
Yep.
All you should do is finance and marketing and strategic planning, or something like that. And everything else, let the Chinese do that for you. And now they're saying, bring it back.
Yeah. And I've been in manufacturing my whole career, and fortunately had a little insight over the last couple of years about the work you've been doing, and knew that the picture was brighter than what the average person might think. But even with that, the numbers that survey had were surprising to me. And I can tell you from the comments on social media that I got after that article, lots of people who are longtime manufacturing kind of, people in the know came back and they were just flabbergasted at those numbers. And so
one of the things that's very consistent with that, the original sort of seminal article on reshoring was in the Atlantic. It was about GE appliances and how they had been buying the appliances from a contract manufacturer in China. They brought them back, they redesigned them, made them simpler to make, et cetera, and it succeeded. And I've got a quote from the CEO of GE Appliances saying, all the people who all these years thought they were saving money by going overseas, they were wrong. And when they do the math correctly, they'll see they should have stayed here.
Yeah. Well, and you made a great point that these kinds of numbers and just those successes then feed further success, because it shows people, this is real. This isn't just, hype to just try to force patriotism down people's throats. It's good business.
Yeah, and if I get access to a big company or the board or whatever, and they say, give us your message. I say, well, how much are you getting from China? And what would happen if all of that stopped completely?
Yep.
What would happen to you? Well, we'd either find replacements or we'd be out of business, And I say, imagine that happened today, and tomorrow you call up the machine shops and the foundries and the steel mills and all these other people and say, hey, I need parts. I need them in a week. When can I have them? And that company's going to say, after the war started yesterday, you're the thousandth call we've had, so I can probably help you in about 5 years.
Yep.
So our message is build those relationships now, get those suppliers now, bring back everything you can now, and then you'll have a place to go to if something happens.
For sure, yeah. Well, and to be fair, a lot of the people running these companies don't have the background in manufacturing and just aren't aware what it takes to tool up and set up a factory to do all the, nearly infinite things that we do to make all the stuff that we need to live.
And part of the problem, I've had several companies come to me and say, Harry, I want to bring the product back. I say, okay, let me see the prints. Oh, we don't have the prints. I say, well, we had the prints 10 years ago when we sent it over there, and they've changed the design, they've changed the material, and they've changed the process of the material. Yep. And so we're going to have to reverse engineer our own product so we can start making it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I've heard that very story. I've had an article about some work that the defense industry is doing in conjunction with Wichita State University, and they're reverse engineering some of our airframes that, there's older ones, but how old is an airframe, right? A few decades old, where even though they have the prints, they can't make the parts because the prints go back to machining technologies that we've supplanted with all the fancy new technology. 3D printing, it wasn't happening 20, 30 years ago.
No.
Not for end use parts. So yeah, it's really fascinating. What are some other drivers of that success that those companies are seeing?
I break it down into two time periods. So from 2010, when we started, to say 2019, I call it disillusionment. And the simplest way to explain that, there's an article that Professor John Gray from The Ohio State University did. And he found 4 mid-sized companies that had offshored and then reshored. So he did the professor survey kind of thing and studied them, did the case. And well, why did you offshore? Well, the wages were 1/10 as much and the price was 30-40% lower, and they were responsive, and it looked great, and we did it. Well, then why'd you reshore? Well, over a couple of years there were delivery issues, and then there were quality issues, and then midnight telephone calls to work out issues, and travel. And when things were bad, what did you do with them? You can't just send them back because it's too far, and intellectual property and everything else. And finally we said, it isn't worth it. We're saving money in theory, but in practice, business is worse because of doing it, and so we brought it back. So that's what was happening then. It's sort of like understanding total cost of ownership, like we talked about, all the irritations and all the friction in the system. Yep. But then from then on, the last couple of years, it's fear of decoupling, fear of being cut off from their suppliers. So they saw themselves lose a month or 2 months with COVID and with the ports not able to get through, and the Suez Canal, and now and now the Red Sea and everything. They see, it's going to be a couple weeks later, and now they can imagine something happening on a geopolitical scale that could cut them off for years or forever. And so, for example, Chief Executive Magazine did a survey and asked companies, what's the biggest driving force of you to reshore? And geopolitical risk was the number one driving factor, ahead of everything else you could think of. Another interesting company, Resolink, they provide software that has to do with supply chain, okay, and risk analysis and so on. So I've got this great graphic from them, and it says companies have gone from the before to the after. So the before is worrying about saving pennies on the components, and the after is making sure you have the components so you can ship your end product and make tens of thousands of dollars in profit. Okay, so people are following, the profit more now than they are following the little lice and nits and crossing the T's on the inexpensive components, because of fear. So people are thinking of bringing the work back as a form of insurance. So just like they insure against fire or flood, which isn't very likely to happen, they are starting to insure against geopolitical risk, which is increasingly likely to happen.
I mean, if there was a silver lining to COVID from a manufacturing standpoint, it was that a lot of people got an education on how much risk there was.
Yeah.
How much they stood to lose.
Another interesting factor, ESG. So we've all heard about environmental, social, and governance. And so BCI Global, which is a European consulting company, did a survey, including in the US. And in the US, they found that reshoring, that the companies responding said that their number one way to achieve their ESG goals was to reshore. Okay, and most people don't think of that, but we've done a study on 9 different components: aluminum, steel, aluminum die casting, apparel, all kinds of things like that. And when you make it here instead of making it there and shipping it here, you reduce the emissions by 25 to 50%, depending on the product. And that's more than you can get by putting up solar panels, or doing the other things that they're doing. And so one of the things we're trying very hard is to get that message out to more companies, that the best way for them to meet their ESG goals, especially what's called Scope 3, which is the supply chain. Okay, so what's happening in the supply chain, which is where 60 or 70% of the emissions occur. And where you don't know what's happening, over in China or India, you bring it back here first. You know what's happening, and just because you've eliminated the transportation, and because the electricity here is produced so much more cleanly because we use less coal than China, for example, does. Between those two factors, you get this 25 to 50% reduction, which is almost no other way they can get that.
Yeah, and so even as it stands today, there are plenty of good economic reasons for a lot of people to be considering this, but it's also a fact that from a government policy and regulatory standpoint, we're doing stupid things to ourselves, right? Making ourselves less competitive. So what needs to change in that regard that can help build on this current head of steam that reshoring has?
But the underlying problem, the thing that I have to face every day when I talk to companies, is that the U.S. manufacturing cost, the factory price, the duty, material, labor, and burden, put together more or less, is 30 or 40% higher than China, and probably than India, and almost the same with Mexico, and maybe 10, 15% higher than other developed countries, Germany, South Korea, Japan, and so on. So we are just the high price place to make stuff.
Mhm.
And so then the question is, why is that? First, the one of the unfortunate and difficult to overcome is that we is a lack of workforce quantity. So we don't have enough to make more, and quality. We don't pick as on the average as smart kids as they do, say, in Germany, where it's seen as a serious career, okay, and we don't train them a fifth as well as they do over there. And so skilled workforce is the one obvious thing. Starting to make some progress. There's fewer kids going to universities, more kids going to apprenticeships. So we're making some progress. The dollar is, most people agreed, overvalued by 20 or 30%. And if the price difference is like this between us and China, if the dollar came down by 20%, then that price difference would be like that. And then the TCO difference would be like this.
Yep.
Then it'd be a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't have to work so hard. U.S. companies have a short-term focus. They tend to, how am I going to make a profit this year? As opposed to, how can we make sure this company survives and flourishes for 20 or 30 years? We don't invest enough. The Chinese, the South Koreans have like 2 or 3 times as many robots per 1,000 workers as we do. And even though our wages are higher, we should be the one that has the most.
Right.
Our productivity, manufacturing labor productivity, on average is, I've seen less than 0.5% per year, and actually minus 0.6% per year for the last 10 years. Yeah. So we're, we talk about robots, we talk about AI, and we talk about, Internet of Things, and our productivity doesn't get any better. And the Chinese productivity has been growing at 6% per year. So we've got old factories with not as well motivated, not as well trained people. So we need to turn that around with new factories and better trained people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is some of that lack of investment, does that also go back to corporate governance? Is that the problem?
Now, I'd say a lot of it is due to low capacity utilization. So it's generally agreed that when capacity utilization exceeds 80%, investment really kicks in, and companies go, why do they then kick in? Because first, they need it to meet demand, and second, they're making lots of money so they can afford it. When you have need and money, you do it. Okay? So we've been in this sort of gradual decline, and our factories operating more like 72%, whereas the Chinese and Indians and Mexicans, they're up here. They keep getting busier and more volume every year. They're growing like this, so they're operating it towards capacity. Order books full, ordering new equipment, new factories, new everything. So we've got old factories, they've got new factories, Yep. So I think if we can show American companies that they can expect their factories to be full for the foreseeable future, I believe they're smart enough to go out and find the right people, train them, and buy good equipment. And when you get a smart high school kid in, and he sees, wow, hey, that's pretty cool. That's a machine, that robot, and that computer. That, hey, I'm on to this. This is and no tuition. And I start making money at 18 instead of at 23. Well, I can see this is a pretty good way to get ahead with my life.
Yep. So toward that end, what should companies be doing to help foster this?
Well, I mentioned TCO, total cost of ownership, that they should use that to identify which products that they're now importing they should make, or if they're a contract manufacturer, then they should be saying which products could I be making for my customers that they are now importing, and like with our import substitution program, they should be recruiting and training. And I believe, imagine you're in a small town and the mill has shut down, and the ex-people who used to work at the factory are working at Walmart, and the kid saying, what should I do, grandpa or uncle? He said, well, don't go into manufacturing. That's a horrible career. Whereas if the mill reshores and it grows and it invests and it expands and they're hiring people all the time, then the guidance counselor and the parent are going to say, Sue, you want to become a welder? Become welder. I think it looks like manufacturing's come back. It's even come back from China. Let's get on board. Let's make this happen. Okay? So I think that can happen. invest. It's easier with TCO, because I was talking to the owner of a good sized forging shop, and I asked him how much investment he does. Well, not some, but not too much. I say, why not? He said, well, I looked at replacing everything that we have, all new everything. Okay, and at the prices we can actually get competing with the imports, my return on investment was negative for the $10 million or $20 million I was going to have to put in. See, so because the price, he's looking at the price difference like this, whereas if you were looking at the TCO difference and it was only like that,
Right.
now all of a sudden that investment would probably have a positive ROI.
Yep.
And so we tell people, use TCO for buying, use it for selling against the imports, and use it when you're trying to figure out where you should make the stuff. You'll see that a lot more of it makes sense to make here, and including investing to make it here.
Yep. Well said. Well, what's next for you and the Reshoring Initiative then?
Let me give one last thing on what companies should
go
do.
ahead. Absolutely.
Lean. So I believe in lean, and it can increase the flow through the factory, reduce the labor hours to make the part, consistent quality, all this kind of thing. So lean. So Deming, many of the listeners probably know of Deming, and he said, I think it's his fourth key principle: stop buying on the basis of price, instead minimize total cost. So he said in 10 seconds what it takes me 20 minutes. but he was famous, so he can get away with that. Okay,
and that's right. He was Deming.
He was Deming. Okay, but and another example of that on the lean side is the Toyota production system, TPS, okay, which incorporates, more or less incorporates, and is sort of in some senses the basis for lean. And if you look at the I think 10 things that you're supposed to stop doing, unnecessary work, unnecessary motion, and unnecessary inventory, et cetera. All of these things are made better by making it locally and sourcing it locally instead of making it halfway around the world and shipping it here. So I think lean is an important part of this.
Yep. Well, and the good news is that most companies understand that that's kind of becoming an imperative. I think there's a lot still, struggling to do it right, but I know there's a lot of good folks out there working on helping people.
Well, some like I was impressed by Danaher.
Oh yeah,
which is a very, very famous, original lean, and I bought the stock about 20 years ago, and it's like 20 times what I paid for it.
Good move.
Anyway, so you asked me what's next for the Reshoring Initiative.
Coming down the road.
So we're revising the TCO estimator. I've been working on it, unfortunately, for a year or two now, and to include ESG, so to quantify the emissions, and also to quantify the social benefit for the U.S. when you bring the work back, more jobs here, for example. So include ESG, to include the Section 301 tariffs, the 10%, 25% tariffs on China, to include the geopolitical risk. So, for example, if a company is buying from a country that has significant risk, and to say, if we can't get those components, how much will our sales go down until we were able to find a new source, and how much, therefore, margin will we lose, and what's the probability of that? Now, I got an expected value of loss of margin. How much more should I be willing to pay for the components to make sure that doesn't happen? And so building that into the TCO calculator. So we think this is going to be a nice pickup. We'd like to have more cooperation with Wall Street because they can, if I could get them every time they interview these companies to say, okay, tell us what you're doing with reshoring, tell us what you're doing about geopolitical risk, tell us what you're doing about ESG. They'd be doing my job for me. I'd be happy. Right. And if anybody out there is in the investment asset management business, again, our data is available for sale. Anybody wants to buy it. We work with some PE companies, private equity companies, that are specifically one I was just on the phone with today is called Build Manufacturing. and they're headquartered in Massachusetts, but they've got building a factory, I think, around Pittsburgh, and they're building it with the intent of being so competitive that they can bring a broad range of products back and produce them in it. And other companies have called me wanting to do the same thing. So that's great to see. We're happy to work with them. We're working on a database to help companies identify what I'll call the bright red apples of reshoring. So just as a crude example, if I had a choice of making something out of steel or making something else out of plastic, I'd probably choose plastic. Why? Because with steel costs 10 or 20% more here than it does in a lot of countries. Yeah. Whereas plastic resin's about the same price here because of fracking. Okay. And if, for example, with injection molding, very highly automated process, so you don't need much labor, and therefore our higher priced labor isn't such a disadvantage. Okay. I'm working on something that would have 10 or 15 factors like that, and a company could go in and say, here's what I'm good at, here's sort of what I want to do, and it would say, okay, given all that, here's what you ought to make, kind of thing, to help them move in the reshoring direction. ESG I mentioned. I've been disappointed that I'm conservative, and I've been disappointed that some conservatives politicians have been very anti-ESG, even though first it obviously has good value in terms of global warming and such, but also if it's applied aggressively, and if the country penalizes imports that are have high emissions and so on, then it works to our advantage. So a good emphasis on ESG is in the interest of the United States, because we're relatively cleaner, and the transportation aspect of things. So I think ESG has a lot to say for it. We're looking to get enough funding so I do not have to work 60 hours a week for the rest of my life. Right? And that's a pretty
good objective.
and we want to convince the government to act. We it's clear to me that a lower dollar would be better. The disadvantage is, like Biden would say, well, inflation. And I've done the calculation, and if companies use TCO to pick which products to bring back, they maybe will have a 2% inflation one time. But if you have a 2% inflation one time, and you can bring back 3 million manufacturing jobs and be much more self-sufficient as a country, to me, that's an easy decision. That's a no-brainer decision. And so if anybody out there that's listening is in the government, we're here to help you.
Yeah, we're here to help you. I like that. All right. Anything else to say before we wrap up, Harry?
I wanted to just do a couple of anecdotes, little fun things. I told you I was going to throw in. So now I'm always selling reshoring. Back then I was selling machine tools and foundry equipment. So just as an example of my obsessive behavior, when I'd be at IMTS, which is the big machine tool show in Chicago, I'm in the big Hilton, and we get on the elevator, everybody's heading for IMTS. I turn around and say, okay, who's here to buy an EDM machine? And a couple people hand me cards, captive audience. And then I get in the cab line, and okay, who's here to buy an EDM machine? People hand me cards. I was at a wedding of my niece, and a very, very nice country club outside Chicago. And everybody I met was a doctor or a lawyer, or teacher or something. So I talked to the bride's mother. I said, "Oh, Bill over there, he's a manufacturer." I go over to Bill. I said, "Bill, need an EDM?" "Oh yeah, we're planning to buy one." And so that he hadn't been talking to our company, and so that month in our international newsletter, it talked about the wedding lead, and another month later, it talked about the wedding order. So we got the order because I picked up the lead at the wedding. Excellent. Another interesting story. I think this is a lot of fun. I got a call from a fellow who was the president of one of the biggest machine shops in the country, most sophisticated, most accurate, most very high quality shop, and he said, "Harry, I'd like you to speak on EDM for the Precision Metal Forming Association." "What do you want me to talk on?" He said, when your wire machines are going to be able to cut the punch straight enough so we don't have to grind them. I said, we do that now. He said, no, we have to grind them. I said, Bill, that's because you've got brand X instead of ours. And within a couple of years, $2 or $3 million worth of our machines. So those moments you live for, as a businessman, when you
opportunity,
bright red apples there you can grab like this.
Wonderful.
Anyway, just a little fun there.
Yes, thank you for sharing those stories, Harry. Thank you for being here. This has been incredibly enlightening, and absolutely keep up the great work there at the Reshoring Initiative.
And likewise with your articles and podcasts. I'm
I'll do
honored to be here. Look forward to doing it again.
Yes,
Thank
definitely
you.
come back and give us an update down the road on how things are going. Hopefully that head of steam keeps rolling. And of course, thanks to you guys in the audience. That's why we're here. And I hope you learned plenty and learned it in an enjoyable way. I think what Harry brings is real enjoyment for going after those red apples in manufacturing. I can't promise everyone's going to bring as much enjoyment as Harry did. We're here at least once, sometimes twice a week, and they're all going to be enjoyable. So thanks again.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Benoski. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.